What's up, crushers and future crushers? I'm Nate, and I'm going to be your guide here today. Welcome to the Blueprint to Crushing Live Poker, Module 1, Foundations. In this module, we will go over 5 lessons. The first is equity and how we use it. Lesson 2 is thinking in ranges. Lesson 3 is counting combos. Lesson 4 is poker math, the foundation of most poker decisions. And lesson 5 is deep stack versus short stack. Lesson 1, what is equity? Here we will explore the concept of equity in poker. Equity refers to your chance of winning the hand. This is normally if the hand is checked down or there is no more betting. It's just the percentage of time you should win the hand. Think of equity as your piece of the pie. If the pie is 100% and we have 33% equity, we have 1/3 of the pie, and that's our piece of the pie. That's what your equity in the overall hand is. The result of any individual hand doesn't matter. All that really matters is the equity won or the equity lost. We just want to pile good decisions on top of good decisions. If we do this, we're going to be profitable in the long term. If we make the best decisions possible for us at each decision point we have in the middle of the hand, overall, we'll keep adding expected value and equity, so the average result is all that matters, and not the individual result of any single hand. You must embrace that we will lose hands, sometimes in some of the most painful ways, and not let that ruin our session. This is often referred to as variance. Some people would call it volatility. Commonly in poker, it's called variance. Variance keeps bad players returning to the table. We have to accept and sometimes even appreciate variance. It's the number one reason why poker can still be profitable for winning players. If losing players never won the game, it would turn into chess, where solid players cannot find games where they can play for money outside of like mega tournaments. Equity realization measures how effectively a player converts their equity into actual winnings, or how often we actually get to eat our piece of the pie. Equity realization is often referred to as EQR, or if you was to ever see EQR on a solver or something you're studying, they're talking about equity realization. The in-position player will realize their equity more than the out-of-position player will. The player with the stronger range, which is typically the pre-flop raiser, will also realize equity better. On the flip side of the coin, being out of position or having the weaker range will realize equity worse. The ability to realize equity is what makes suited hands much more valuable than their unsuited counterparts. While it's true that a suited hand will typically only have 2% more equity than the same unsuited hand, the suited hand allows you to realize your equity at a much higher rate. And this is why being in position as the pre-flop raiser is the most ideal way to play hands and the most profitable configuration you can get yourself in.
Hey guys, it's that time of year again. It is Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and CrushLivePoker.com is offering 30% off of all plan levels, including the already heavily discounted yearly elite subscription level. All you have to do is click on the link in the description to get this deep discount. And we have a new exciting feature and a new course to announce. We have the BART bot. This has been in the works for the better part of a year. You can ask the BART bot any question about poker, and it will point you exactly where to go in our vast library of content with time codes. It's going to be a great way to really maximize your study time. And we have also dropped a new course, the Blueprint to Crush Live Poker. Check it out over at CrushLivePoker.com.
Lesson 2. Thinking in ranges. First off, a range is the possible hands either player could possibly have based on their prior actions. Anytime you're ranging someone, you will always start back at pre-flop, then move on to the flop, the turn, and the river, and each one of those individual actions can reduce the opponent's range or even your range to get close to the actual hand they have when you consider the board and the bet sizing and everything that goes into playing the hand. You should always think in terms of ranges. Despite belief to the contrary, any and every player can be put on a range by their actions. It doesn't matter if they play every hand, half the hands, or only 20% of the hands pre-flop. You can still apply a range of hands to every villain. Some of these ranges would be much wider than others, but you can still put them on a range of hands and start reducing it. Even the guy who VPIPs 100% of the time does different things pre-flop. He's going to have hands he limps. He's going to have hands he raises with. So if he's always in the hand and he limps in, that's going to split his range in half, or maybe even more than half, with that one particular action. You always take what you know and keep reducing their range by any action or any more information you're given that can help do this. Your actual hand doesn't matter as much as most people think. It isn't 100% of our decision-making process. Our perceived range can and will influence our actions. Now, there are times where your individual hand matters a ton, and other times where it doesn't matter as much. You can always mix in what your range is on certain board textures to get the results you're looking for, especially if you're bluffing. Always consider the ranges at play for both the villain and the other hands that may be in our range based on our actions. Reducing the villain's range. To reduce our opponent's range, we want to visualize what we think he has based on every action that we've seen. Let's say he limps in from hijack and we raise in the cutoff and he calls. The flop is Queen of Hearts, 10 of Spades, 7 of Hearts. He checks and we bet $40 into $60. He calls. His pre-flop limp tells us that he doesn't have a big pocket pair, so we can mostly eliminate 9-9 and above. He also doesn't have big suited Broadway hands. That eliminates hands like Ace-10 suited plus, King-Jack suited plus, Queen-Jack suited, Jack-10 suited, and maybe Ace-Queen off or better. King-Queen off is probably also likely out of his range when he limps. When we bet the flop and he calls, we will fold most of his air or junk. If he is passive or trappy, it leaves him with 9 Queen-10 combos and 3 7-7 combos for thick value. He would also have Ace-9, Ace-8, Ace-6, Ace-5, Ace-4, Ace-3, and Ace-2 of Hearts. He has 4 combos of 9-8 suited, 4 combos of Jack-9 suited, 12 combos of King-Jack off, and another 9 combos of flush draws. He also has some 10x and 7x as weak-made hands, and Queen-Jack off and Queen-9 as top pair type hands. This is also commonly referred to as hand reading, and hand reading is one of the most important skills to develop. Great hand readers are almost always very good poker players overall, and developing your hand reading ability will take you as far as developing any skill in poker that I can think of. To beat the best players, you will need to balance your range. Balance is less necessary in lower stakes. However, if you see the same opponents most nights, you will need to have some semblance of balance, but you wouldn't need to be like completely balanced. You would just have to mix it up a little bit. Not always c-bet. Check sometimes when you're out of position, but don't do things 100% of the time where players can catch on to what you're doing. The best balance gives you all types of hands for each action. To work on this, you can download a poker calculator and study the Solve for Live ranges for each position. In the equity calculator, you can enter a range you are studying and see how much equity it has versus other ranges or even other single hands. You can also build what you think the opponent's ranges are and get a random flop and practice reducing their range street by street so it comes to you easier when you're actually on the table playing the game. Lesson 3. Counting combos. Each unpaired hand has 16 combos, 4 suited and 12 offsuit combos. To figure out how many combos are remaining, you multiply the number of unseen cards by each other to find the remaining combos. An example, if we held Ace Queen Heart Heart and the board was Ace of Diamonds 7 2, there would be 8 combos of Ace King available for our opponents to have because we hold 1 ace and there is 1 on the board, but all of the kings are still available. So 2 aces times 4 kings equals 8. Also, there would be 2 suited combos since we have the Ace of Hearts and the board has the Ace of Diamonds. It leaves the spade and club combos, 2 suited combos and 6 offsuit combos to equal 8 total combos. Paired hands have 6 combos. You can reduce the number of combos of a pair available by the number of cards you can see. 1 seen card makes only 3 combos of the pair available, and 2 seen cards equals 1 combo left. So if we hold Ace 6 of spades and the board is 10-6 deuce, there would be 3 combos of ace-ace available because we have an ace. There would also be 3 sets of 10-10 available because a 10 is on the board. There would only be 1 combo of 6-6 remaining because we have a 6 and there is a 6 on the board. Blockers are relevant cards in your hand that makes it more difficult or sometimes impossible for the opponent to have the card in their hand. When it makes it impossible to have the hand because of our blocker, that is called a full blocker. An example of this is if the board was 10-6-2 all spades and we have the ace of spades, king of hearts. Holding the ace of spades would make it impossible for them to have the nut flush, so we have a full blocker to the nut flush. But if we hold a hand like Jack-Jack and the board runs out Queen 10-9, we block them from having King-Jack, but it's only a partial blocker because while we have 2 blockers to the Jack, he still has combos of King-Jack available. We just reduced the combos that he could have of King-Jack. So that is a partial blocker. Most blockers are going to be partial blockers and will not eliminate the combo that could be the nuts from their hand completely. The only time you have a full blocker is on flushing boards. On blockers are when you have a hand that does not block your opponent from having a hand we want him to have. Example, if we have Queen-Queen on 10-9-8 rainbow, we double block the villains from Queen-Jack. If we have 7-7 on Ace 7-3, we unblock the villain from having Ace-X top pair. You can practice counting combos at the table when you're not involved in the hand, and you should study away from the table. At the table, consistently put opponents on ranges both when you're in the hand and when you're just watching. This is a great way to get better at both hand reading and combo counting. When counting combos, realize that people are much more likely to have suited versions of some hands than others, especially hands like 8-6 suited or 8-5 suited. Most gappers and 2-gappers, things like that, people only play the suited versions of. So they're only going to have the suited versions when you're counting combos. So you only want to look to see how many suited versions are available. Lesson 4, Poker Math. Starting with pot odds. There are 2 ways to calculate pot odds. The first way is you take pot size divided by bet size to get something like 3-1. You add 3 plus 1 to get to a percentage versus being in pot odds, which would equal 0.25 or 25%. Example, if the bet is 50 into 100, the pot is 150 over 50, which reduces to 3-1. Add 1 to get to 4-1 or 0.25 or 25%. The other way is to add bet size plus pot size together to get pot size after call or final pot size. Put final pot over bet size to get your equity needed. Example, if the bet is 50 into 100, you would add 50 plus 100 plus 50 for our call to get to 200. 200 over 50, which is the bet size again, equals 0.25, which is 25%. Equity. For equity, there is a common shortcut called the rule of 4 and 2. For the rule of 4 or 2, it is asking if you're on the flop or the turn. So on the flop, you're going to use 4, and the turn, you're going to use 2. Calculate the number of outs you think you have. On the flop, multiply that number by 4. And on the turn, you take that number and multiply it by 2. As an example, if you have a flush draw with 9 outs, on the flop, multiply by 4 to get 36%, and on the turn, multiply by 2 to get 18%. This isn't perfect, but it will get you very close to your actual equity. And we don't need to be 100% accurate all the time to make these decisions. We just want it to be very, very close. So this shortcut works pretty well. Poker stove in your head. If the board is king of spades, 7 of hearts, 4 of spades, we bet 200 and 300 and say we get raised. We think the villain raises with sets, his flush draws, and his 6-5 suited. Since we're the pre-flop raiser, he has 3 sets of 7 and 3 sets of 4. He also has 4 combos of 6-5 suited, and let's give him 8 combos of flush draws he would raise. We have 5% equity versus his 6 sets, and we will combine the draws to make 12 total draws. Against the 12 total draws, we have about 75% equity. We would then add 75 plus 75 since we have double the number of draws. Then add 5 once, which 75 plus 75 plus 5 equals 155. We would then divide by 3 as we would have 3 weighted numbers. The answer here is over 50%, so we can never fold to any size raise when we have over 50% equity. That means we are actually in control of the hand and have more equity than they have. So there's not a bet out there that can make us fold. Implied pot odds. How much do we need to make? So if you're 2-5, 1K effective, and we're in the big blind with King of Hearts, 6 of Hearts. Cutoff goes to 20 and both blinds call. Pot is $60. The flop comes out Ace of Hearts, 9 of Diamonds, 3 of Hearts. It checks to the cutoff who bets 30. Small blind folds and we call. The turn has $120 in the pot and is the 7 of clubs. We check. He bets $75. We have 9 outs, so we would divide the number of unknown cards, which is 45, by 9, and we get 5. We subtract 1 to get back to pot odds, which equals 4. 4 times 75 is 300, so we need to make 4 times the bet size to break even. And since there was 120 in the pot, plus his $75 bet, that equals $195. We would subtract the $195 from the $300 we need to make to get $105 total dollars that we need to make throughout the rest of the hand to make this a profitable call. If we make the call, there would be $270 in the pot since our call would be added there, and we have plenty of money behind. So we need to ask ourselves, if we hit the flush, can we bet at least $105 into $270 and get called? The more likely we think this is true, the more we call. Also, there's a cheat sheet you can follow that will show you the number to multiply the bet by to help figure this out, and it should be right here. Minimum defense frequency, or MDF. The formula is pot size divided by pot size plus bet size. And MDF is just the inverse of fold equity. So fold equity is the odds you need on your bluff, or how often your bluff has to work to break even. So the equation here is risk over risk plus reward equals your break even percentage. And for me, I always remember this side, the risk over risk plus reward, for whatever reason sticks in my head better. So if you can remember that side of the equation, you can always figure out the other side, MDF, as well, because it's always going to be the inverse. If your fold needs to work 60% of the time to break even, then the MDF of the opponent is going to be 40% and vice versa. So anytime you do either of these calculations, the other players have to do the opposite. If we need a bluff to work 33%, then the opponent needs to call 67%. An example, if there is 200 in a pot and you make a pot size bluff of 200, you're risking 200 to win 200. So 200 over 400 equals 0.5 or 50%. So when you make a pot size bluff, you need the opponent to fold 50% of the time to break even. You can look at this with other sizes as well. If you use a half pot size bet, betting 100 into 200, you put 100 on the top of 300 and get 0.33 or 33%. I also made a cheat sheet for this right here as well. Calculating a pot size raise. 3 times the size of the bet plus any additional money is the equation for calculating a pot size raise or bet. So an example, if the pot is 300 and we check, the villain bets 200, a pot size check raise would be 3 times 200 plus the 300 that was already in the pot, which would equal 900. It is considered a pot size raise because we're laying a 2-to-1 price. So in that situation, when he bets 200, we would raise to 900, not put 900 more in the pot. We would just raise to 900, and that would be a pot size raise. Lesson 5, deep stack versus short stack. Most cash games are played at 100 big blinds deep or deeper. You always want to play the effective stack. The effective stack is the smallest stack involved in the hand. As an example, if I'm under the gun with $1,500, The low jack's in the hand, he has $800, and the button's in the hand with $900. We are $800 effective because you always take the lowest stack. If the low jack were to fold after the flop, then we're 900 effective with the button. When someone uses the term effective stack, they always mean who's the shortest stack, so what's the money we're playing for. You will often hear people confuse this. An example is on the call-in show. You'll hear somebody call in and say, I'm the hero on the button, 1500 effective, low jack with $1,000 limps in, I 3-bet to whatever, and the big blind with $600 calls. And Bart would have to say something like, so we're 600 effective actually. As stacks get deeper, you need stronger hands to invest a lot of money. Top pairs and over pairs are marginal hands when you're very deep. Do not blindly stack off with aces when you're over 200 big blinds deep. You want to play a little more cautiously the deeper and deeper you get. Aces is a great hand, but it's still just one pair. So if people are piling in money with 300 or 400 big blinds, they probably have one pair beat. You really want to look at the board and how it looks and how the configuration is and what kind of board textures we have to make these types of decisions. For example, pocket aces is a great hand on 9 deuce deuce rainbow, but it's very marginal if the board is queen jack 10 with a flush draw or a queen jack 10 monotone and we have red aces on all spades or whatever it may be. You always want to look at the board texture and what's going on to determine how good of a hand you need to invest a lot of money. Stacking off blindly with big pocket pairs is what bad players do, and it's kind of what makes them losing players instead of winning players a lot of times, is the fact that they can't get rid of their big hands pre-flop when they get deep stacked. Shallow stacks. Pairs and big cards go way up in value. Already having a made hand is very valuable when the stacks are below 100 big blinds, especially when you get down to like 50 and 40 big blinds. This is why tournament players shove a lot of pocket pairs and like offsuit ace X and things like that, because often you just have the best hand already. Shoving all in over a raise is a good strategy when you're shallow. Again, most people will come into pots, especially at live low stakes, and they'll just call a lot of bets and call a lot of bets. So when someone opens and there's a call, maybe 2 calls, it's great to just shove it in and take in all the dead money. Top pair and over pairs go way up in value. You never fold over pairs when you're less than 60 big blinds deep or something like that, unless the board is just absolutely awful for you and you don't have much money invested for some reason. Again, having hands that are already made are extremely valuable when you're short, and having big pairs, over pairs, and top pairs with really good kickers are going to be very valuable when you're playing like 60 bigs, 50 bigs, things like that deep. You want to play a tight, aggressive strategy and not see too many flops. You can call some small raises from the big blind. However, against larger sizes, you should play a 3-bet or fold strategy. We don't have enough big blinds available to us to waste calling speculative hands and just folding flops. While most opponents will call with all types of junk, seeing a flop without a strong hand is a losing play, and it just bleeds out your chips over time. At 30 big blinds effective or less, play a jam or fold strategy. This will maximize your fold equity. It helps you chip up to have more big blinds in front of you, and many players will call a raise hoping to see a flop and then play poorly to aggression at it behind them, which is what our jam would be. When we're deep stacked, implied odds hands go up in value. And implied odds hands are hands that don't have a lot of value pre-flop versus like big cards, for example. But they have a lot of implied value because if you make hands, you start pumping money into the pot and you can win more and more money. But if you miss, it's easy to get out of the way and not invest money into a loser. So with these type of hands, we're basically only making the investment if things are going our way post-flop. And we get out of there when the board comes out like king, queen, jack, and we have the 6-7 suited or whatever. Implied odds hands are suited connectors, suited ace X, pairs, medium pairs, low pairs, things like that. These are all examples of implied odds hands. If the opponent is putting a lot of money in, our hand needs to be very strong, or we need to have a really strong draw to continue. Top pair can be a marginal hand post flop in these spots. Specifically, highly connected middling boards, sometimes top pair is just like a fold in these spots. That's something like Queen Jack 10 with a flush draw or rainbow, it don't matter. Short-handed play. Exploit players who adjust by playing many more hands because it's short-handed. You're going to see this often where people think, wow, it's four-handed now. I have to play a lot more than I typically would. Well, while that's true because you're playing the ranges in the chart, which are just a lot wider than early position ranges, it's not true that you should be wider than those ranges. And these people will punt tons of money with very speculative hands because they're playing far too wide. Take advantage of that and crush them. Others will still play their regular under the gun range from the cutoff four-handed or whatever position is first to act. When this is the case, what you want to do is just open super wide and make them fold, or get out of the way if they open first to act and you're next to act. If you don't have a monster, just fold because they have a pretty tight range. For a deeper dive, check out this related content. First start lessons 7 and 8 and the Back to Basics module of Crushing Live No Limit course. Equity math and a simple way to look at the math of draws and implied odds. Second is the CLP podcast number 411, the greatest common denominator of combinations. And third is one of my favorite CLP podcasts of all time, CLP podcast number 164, Stove in Your Head. And this goes over how to turn yourself into an equity calculator, basically. And before I heard this podcast, I always struggled on how to figure out how much equity I had versus, say, a range of hands, right? So if he has some sets in there and he has some draws in there, but how did I put that together in enough time at the table to make it viable for my game? And then I heard this podcast and Bart just nails it. And it really like clicked the light bulb for me, and I can just do this stuff super fast at the table. And it's an older podcast, and it's amazing how well it still translates today. But it really helped turn my game around and helped me in a spot I used to get kind of stuck in when I became a CLP sub in the first place. So I really suggest checking that podcast out.